Labrīt, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yes. I'm Krista Baumane. I'm director of PROVIDUS, and I would like to welcome everyone here to our workshop. It is great to have such an impressive array of civil society activists and civil servants interested in better public engagement from across the Baltic Nordic region. In addition to the local participants, we have participants from Estonia, Lithuania, Germany, Poland, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. Thank you all for coming. PROVIDUS is a non-governmental think tank. It was established 15 years ago, and our main areas of activity are good governance, anti-corruption, and migration. We do research, policy analysis, regular think tank things, but in addition to that, we have always done non-think tanky things, like actively pursuing public participation, experimenting with new interactive methods, and pioneering public consultation projects. This has been on our agenda throughout the entire time that we have worked, and government openness has always been of particular interest to our organization. So PROVIDUS has taken a leading role on implementing also the open government partnership principles in Latvia. An important issue that determines the success of public participation and engagement is trust, or lack of it. At personal level, meaning do we trust our neighbor, do we trust other members of society, and also at institutional level, do we trust the government, do we trust politicians, do we trust political parties, the parliament. And evidence shows that the levels of trust in our region are very varied, from the highest levels of public trust in the Scandinavian countries that have some of the highest levels of public trust in the world, to very poor levels of trust in countries like ours and Lithuania and Poland. And we believe that meaningful interaction between citizens and government is a way to increase this trust. And despite the widespread concern that democracy is in retreat in Europe, and public participation is falling, membership in political parties is falling, there has been a positive explosion of a rich array of various citizen engagement projects and activities in the last 10 years. And some of these examples will be showcased and discussed here today. I thank the Friedrich Ebert Foundation and the EU Europe for Citizens program for helping us organize and support this event. And I wish you a very interesting day. I will now hand over the mic to my colleague Iveta Kažoka, who is really behind organizing this event. She's a senior researcher at PROVIDUS, and will introduce our keynote speaker and moderate the first discussion. Iveta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Krista. Hello, everyone. Let me briefly explain how we are going to proceed today. So our event has three main parts. It will be introduced by a general bird's-eye view on how our region compares to the rest of the world. Then we will showcase some impressive examples of citizen engagement throughout our region. Then there will be a lunch break, and it will be followed by interactive workshops on 4 different topics, which basically means that 4 round tables will be brought into this room during the lunch break, and then we will get to the most interactive part. That's not to mean that everything else in our program will lack interactivity. Every presentation is has been prepared with intention to not take much more time than the question and answers following it. We have a tremendous amount of collective intelligence and civic engagement in this room, so I think that that the presentation, the question and answer part is just as important as the presentations will be. My task is to keep track of the time, so sometimes I might be a bit cruel, but this is the way how to proceed in events like this. The reason why I'm talking into a microphone, and I ask you to also not talk until the moment when I'm with you with the mic, is that we are being broadcasted live at the moment, both on PROVIDUS website and also on the unified news portal of Latvia's public television and radio services. They're also broadcasting live on Facebook. That's why it's imperative that we talk only in the microphone, so that not only us in this audience, but also everyone else can hear us. The recording of the first part of our conference until the lunch break will also be available online later. One word of caution. I don't know how many of you, especially those who have arrived from different countries, whether you have noticed it, but tomorrow we're going to have municipal elections. And today we have a day of silence, day of reflection, so please no campaigning, at least while we're live on the public website, public broadcaster's website. I don't think there is a huge risk, but I have to warn nevertheless. Feel free to Twitter whatever you hear in this room. We in PROVIDUS will be tweeting from our Twitter account. We are not using any hashtag for this conference, so feel free to use anyone you like. But it would be excellent if you could somehow, maybe at the end of your tweet, refer to PROVIDUS account so that we can see it and are able to retweet it. And also one important part of this conference is networking. That's why there are so many interaction possibilities, and also why we have several breaks. One tool for this interaction is the card that we are having. They can be I don't know, placed like this or like this. It really depends on you. Write whatever you consider to be the most important thing about you, about which you would like to start a conversation or get to know each other. Okay, so that's the technicalities about today. I will be trying to moderate whatever happens there, but right now I think we should go straight to the first part of our conference. A keynote speech. When we first considered making an agenda for this conference, we thought who better to see how our region, the Baltic Sea region, looks in comparison to other regions than the most impressive global initiative on anti-corruption and citizen engagement, open government partnership. That's why Peter, who has been here also previously in different capacities, not just in a capacity as a representative of open government partnership, but also, if I remember correctly, Transparency International, has agreed to tell us about ourselves as a region. and hopefully this presentation, and I'm sure about it, will be illuminating and useful for every one of us in this room and also everyone watching us live. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Iveta, for that lovely introduction. I don't presume to be telling yourself, you about yourselves. I'll be using, some of the indices and data collected by OGP and beyond in my speech. But let me move over here. Can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everybody here in this room and beyond, to those of you who are following us on the broadcast as well. It's always an honor to be back here. As Iveta mentioned, it's not my first time. My name is Peter Varga, And I've been working with civil society organizations in the Baltic Sea region for a number of years, previously in my capacity as regional coordinator for Transparency International, and currently as the Europe Regional Civil Society Coordinator for the Open Government Partnership. And thanks a lot for inviting me. It's lovely to see, so many dedicated civic servants and civil society activists in this room, many of whom I'm actually lucky to call my friends. All of you fighting for a more open public life, a more open civil society, a more open government. And I will, as I said, I will tell you a little bit about how this region compares to the rest of the world. But before I do that, I just wanted to scan the room quickly. How many of you know what the Open Government Partnership is, actually? Okay, about half the room. Maybe this is a good time then just to show you a very brief video to kind of give you a feel of what we work for, and that will put some of the things I say later in context. So let me try to pull that up. I hope the sound is on, yes.
It began 5 years ago with a simple idea. Since governments serve the people, they should be open to the people.
The strongest foundation for human progress lies in open economies, open societies, and in open governments.
L'alliance entre les gouvernements et la société civile est une nécessité.
8 governments working closely with 9 civil society organizations committed to becoming more transparent and accountable to the citizens they serve.
OGP brings to the global attention the notion that governments shouldn't operate in secrecy.
But that was only the beginning. Today, OGP includes over 70 governments and thousands of civil society organizations tackling the toughest challenges facing society. Together, we have made over 3,000 open government commitments with impressive early results.
Lo que hace la ley es transparentar esas actividades de audiencia o reunión que solicita un lobista.
We need to know who really owns and controls our companies.
Citizen participatory audits promote constructive and collaborative partnerships between citizens and the state.
Sharing this information will hold the industry to account and empower citizens.
Más de 180 consejos fueron creados para ahora.
This is government heavily investing not only in improving transparency, but protecting basic human rights.
OGP is showing that opening up government is hard, but it leads to real change. And we must now multiply our impact.
In the next 5 years, the success of OGP is going to be measured by whether OGP delivers a transformative impact in the lives of ordinary citizens.
The challenge is how to make a substantial civil society engagement, to bring co-creations, and also to engineering the social economic change.
We need to see more space for genuine participation from citizens.
We're trying to bridge the gap between what it is that we do as a government and what it is that we hear from our citizens.
OGP has to restore more confidence in the citizens.
Keterbukaan, kepercayaan itu yang membuat kita sebenarnya jadi pejabat lebih enak.
Trabajar mucho más cerca de los gobiernos, no solo nacionales, sino subnacionales, municipalidades más chicas, y colaborar en los procesos de apertura que ya existen en esos lugares.
Governments, in order to be credible, in order to be legitimate, need to figure out ways in which they work with citizens.
OGP will be as strong or as weak as we make it and allow it to be.
We are an international partnership of reformers, building a movement to make government better and transform the lives of citizens. The Open Government Partnership, celebrating 5 years of impressive growth and taking our movement forward together.
So thank you for bearing with me for that brief presentation, just to give you an idea of what OGP is about. Later on, I'm also happy to obviously take questions on OGP and anything I'm about to say here. So as you have seen, the OGP, the community of the Open Government Partnership, has grown to 75 countries as of last December, Germany being one of the latest countries to have joined. And we have, together with the reformers and civil society actors, made almost 3,000 commitments now to open up government, to engage citizens, to increase public participation, access to information, transparency, etc. What I've been asked here today to do, though, is a no small task, I assume, is to basically try to assess whether this region can be counted as underachievers or overachievers compared to the rest of the world. And I don't think I surprise anybody here at the get-go by saying that there's no such thing as being overachievers in public participation. Having said that, however, I do think, and I can say this fairly confidently, that this is a part of the world, this is a region to which the rest of the world can look, for inspiration when it comes to citizen engagement. It is leading with a lot of innovations, not just in public participation, but other segments as well. And I'm going to flesh out a couple of examples, and I'm sure during the rest of the day you will as well. So I look forward to this discussion. First off, basically, let me just step back a little and remind all of us here in this room, we may not need reminding, but nevertheless, that this is actually a city, Riga, where one of the most powerful and one of the largest experiences or symbols of citizen engagement happens, which is, as you know, the Baltic Way, right? In 1989, August 23rd, there were 2 million people from Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia who actually stood side by side, holding each other's hands, and formed one of the largest and one of the first in the world, unbroken human chains, which ran all the way from Vilnius through Riga to Tallinn, more than 670 kilometers. And I think it's a very powerful symbol of, citizen engagement at its truest, people standing up against tyranny and oppression, and for the values that, we like to think hold up our societies today, fundamental freedoms, democracy, etc. So just very briefly, to sketch out, what I was talking about. So I think that already sort of started the beat, so to speak, or set the tone of, public engagement very early on. And I think just to look at, where we stand today, I think it's something to keep in mind and to look back to and to cherish. So how can we assess, citizen engagement and civic participation? One of the most obvious measures to gauge this is actually looking at civic space. And we have international indices and studies that do this. I'm going to show you the Civic Space Monitor, which just came out a month and a half ago, basically. If you will, this is the supply side of citizen engagement. What space does government give to civil society to operate, right? And as we know and has been mentioned, globally, civil society is actually shrinking. It's under assault from many corners, and it's almost striking to see that this region, this maybe wider region, is almost exceptional in being a fully open and enabling civil society. You can see that tiny corner up at the top of, Europe that is judged to be universally, enabling civil society environment, with a few additional countries like Ireland, Iceland, and New Zealand from beyond this region. So again, I think it's something that, is to be cherished and built on, and thanks to your work, not the least, I think it stands to, stay like this, hopefully. A couple of other, comparative figures I wanted to bring to you for this discussion is to basically look at another fairly obvious sign, the demand side, so to speak, if you will, how people are actually standing up and using their rights to, engage in public life. One of the simplest and most universally available figures for that from around the world is voter turnout. Basically, every 4 or 5 years in most countries, people go and, pass the ballot, to participate in the simplest, or actually some might say most powerful way in public life. And how does this region compare to the rest of the world? We have obviously figures for this. It divides fairly neatly, as you can see. In the middle, I put up the OECD average and the global average, being 68 and 66% respectively. And sort of the western northern arc of the Baltic Sea region, so to speak, is actually above, this average, with Denmark and Sweden scoring the highest and consistently so, as has been already mentioned. Germany, again, consistently in the low to middle 70s in terms of water turnout. Finland, which used to be a bit higher up until about the 1990s, and since then has dropped a little, but is consistent now around the 70 mark. And then at the lower end, unfortunately, sort of the eastern arc of the Baltic Sea region closes the rank with Estonia, Latvia, Poland, and Lithuania closing up the ranks. One kind of sliver of hope maybe for Lithuania is that until 2004, they've been actually sliding even below this, and since then they've picked up a little. So again, this is one of the most powerful ways to express your willingness to take part in civic life, and I hope that this can also improve for these countries in the coming years. There is actually a civic engagement index out there, which is actually fairly new, done by the OECD. I pulled up this slide for you as well that shows sort of where the countries sitting in this room are situated compared to their peers in the OECD. What this index looks at is basically one I just showed you, the voter turnout, and they also gauge what type of stakeholder involvement happens in countries in the creation of laws. So what are the formal ways for citizens, for civil society and stakeholders to take part in drafting, the legislation? And on this composite index, you can see, where, maybe it's a bit too small, but, you can see that Denmark comes up 4th, and then closing up the rank is Poland at the 26th place from the 38 countries of the OECD. And then a third one, there is a so-called Civic Participation Index, which is actually done by the World Justice Project's Rule of Law, big survey that they do in over 100 countries. This is a subcomponent of it. They measure civic participation, which actually looks at a variety of things, the existence of fundamental rights and how they are respected in the country, of assembly, association, freedom of speech, etc. Also, the right to petition governments, the right to basically ask your civil servant, what type of services are available, and for civil servants to inform the public about upcoming consultations, regulations, etc. And on this one, we see a somewhat similar pattern. Some of the countries here, unfortunately, are not indexed, so I can't give you the figure for Latvia and Lithuania, but you see the others. And you can see that somewhat familiar pattern is emerging with the Nordic countries coming out at top, Germany somewhere in the middle, and Poland closing up the rank. Again, a good point here is that the global average is actually surpassed by all of these countries in terms of, these measures that I mentioned. And then next, these were sort of the international indices, not coming out of OGP, coming out of, these reputable other institutions. But of course at OGP, from those almost 3,000 commitments and various action plan cycles, so just for those of you, this wasn't mentioned in the video, who don't know OGP that well, the way, the system, the platform operates is that basically government and civil society come together, they co-create a so-called action plan every 2 years into which they put the commitments that they jointly feel would open up government in their country. And these are obviously, tracked, data is recorded on this, and even evaluated by a unit of ours, which is called the Independent Reporting Mechanism, or IRM. So the IRM database is fully public. You can also dig deep. You can see all these commitments that have been made in the past 5.5 years. Based on this data, we can tell you a couple of things. The share of civic participation commitments from these countries. I put, the global average, which is 34%, fairly neatly 1/3 of all the commitments, which I say fairly neat because there are 3 main pillars of basically OGP. One is civic participation, Another one is transparency and access to information. And the third one is public accountability. So globally, it happens to be a coincidence, but about a third of these commitments relate to civic participation. Now, in these countries, again, it varies quite widely. And, you know, just to preface this by saying that this may not mean much, I just wanted to show you this, statistic that Finland, almost 2/3 of their commitment have in one way or another to do with civic participation. Sweden and Lithuania, actually much less than a third. Maybe they put other commitments, open data related, anti-corruption type laws, etc. So again, in and of itself, this may not mean much, but I think it's a good indicator to have up here nevertheless. You don't see Poland and you don't see Germany. The reason for that is that Germany just joined half a year ago, and they are creating their first action plan currently. And Poland is not a participating member, unfortunately, in the Open Government Partnership. A couple of other figures from the OGP. We also measure, or better said, I think, we also recommend governments 6 steps in the process of co-creating these action plans to open up civil society and engage their citizens. You can see them up there. So number one is the availability of a timeline. These are not rocket science. These are, you know, kind of civic participation standards around the world, but these are actually expected by all governments to be performed in OGP. Number 2 is giving adequate notice. Number 3 is, you know, raising awareness about the opportunities to consult on the OGP action plan. Number 4 is to have a wide and deep consultation in society with a variety of stakeholders and as many civil society and public members as possible. Number 5 is the use of multiple channels. So again, on and offline, you know, thinking of those who may be digitally illiterate, thinking of, you know, those oftentimes elderly citizens who may not use, you know, online services to be able to take part in such consultations. And number 6, to document and feedback on the consultation, right? So how many, on average, how many of these steps are observed by OGP countries? You can see it in the middle. It's, you know, 4 of these 6 steps on average are observed by the countries. Only a handful of them observe all 6. They are up there. The one country from this region no, Denmark is no longer there. So the one country is Finland. Denmark used to be there, but they dropped out. How do the 8 countries in this region compare to this? No difference, right? So in this sense, no underachieving, no overachieving. In OGP, the 6 of the 8 countries that participate also observe 4 of these steps. One, again, good sign is that they have all been improving, by the way. Again, it's also a process that, you know, you can learn over time, but all of these countries actually have been improving from one action plan cycle to the next. So again, that's a sign of hope. Another element of, you know, the OGP model is what we call the multi-stakeholder forums, which are, for all intents and purposes, sort of sitting permanent dialogue mechanisms in a variety of formats or governance structures in these countries, but it's basically the whole idea is that, again, government and civil society comes together to co-create the action plans, and also once the action plans are accepted, oftentimes by the cabinet, to monitor its implementation, right? So there's regular gatherings. This is a picture from Italy, one of the good models we like to hold up for this public consultation. But globally, there are 24 of these sitting multi-stakeholder forums in the 59 countries that have already submitted a national action plan, which is a 40% rate. We obviously would like to get this up to 100%. Right now, again, it's not even halfway of the mark. We're working on that, of course. How does the region compare? We have 3 out of the 6 participating countries from the Baltic Sea region, so it's a little bit better, 50%. Again, room for improvement in this region as well. A third element, or a third type of information we collect at the OGP is basically, and this is not a measure invented by us, this is actually by the International Association of Public Participation. They have come up with this spectrum which measures how could we describe, you know, the public consultation in countries, running all the way from, well, no consultation at the bottom, to inform. Sorry, actually it's reversed. So inform is the neest step, which means that civil society is just kept informed, FYI, this is happening. consult, in which there is some reaching out and some listening to civil society to involve, in which, as the name suggests, the involvement is actually a little bit deeper. The decisions are made by the government still, but there's feedback provided. Collaborate, in which pretty much civil society and government are equal. And then the fifth one, empower, in which in some cases governments give the decision-making power to civil society. So that's the spectrum. Again, where does it stand globally? Of the participating countries, 35%, 1/3 actually engaged as civil society at the involve or above level. So that's pretty good. The involve, I think, should be the minimum for OGP countries. Where does it stand in this region? It's actually, again, higher. So some, I wouldn't say overachieving, but good practice coming from this region. 50%, both at the creation and the implementation level. Improvements are always welcome, of course, and OGP is supporting both government and civil society to improve. We have just literally a month and a half ago came out with our new co-creation standards, which are 60 guidelines basically to civil society and government on how to actually co-create and involve their citizens in public policy making. And another tool we have available, this is all on our website, opengovpartnership.org. Another tool that's available is how to design and manage these multi-stakeholder forums. Again, both are handbooks with a lot of examples, best practices from around the world. All right, I also promised to give you a couple of good practice highlights from across the region, and I'm sure many of these examples will be familiar to some of you. Let's start with Denmark, and I start with them because they actually won the Open Government Awards in 2015. The OGP actually has an Open Government Award to which some of these programs, hopefully some of the ones that you will feature today, would also, they are eligible, so hopefully they would be applying to this award. But anyhow, this is happening annually, and some of the examples I bring were featured or shortlisted or even won this award. So the Danish example that I think many of you know about is the Senior Citizens Council, which is basically an elected body in all the 98 municipalities in Denmark, elected by senior citizens and from senior citizens above the age of 60. And by statutory law, basically all city councils in Denmark have to consult these senior citizen councils to ask, their opinions about laws that affect them. So this is pretty hardwired in the Danish DNA, which is great. And you also have the website links there. I'm happy to share this presentation later on, of course, if you want to look these up to learn a bit more about these examples. Another example I brought from Denmark is an institution, a think tank, if you will, called Mind Lab, which is actually a cross-sectoral organization owned by 3 ministries and a municipality. It's a very interesting model. And what they do is that they basically provide the outside-in view for government in a way. So they talk to users and users of public services, they talk to business, they talk to citizens, they talk to stakeholders on how to improve public administration processes and systems. So for example, they recently ran a pilot of a mobile application that would enable citizens to file their taxes. And of course, learning, the mistakes and the glitches, they can save a lot of money, improve this before it's being rolled out. So these are the type of things they do, a very interesting sort of collaborative think tank, taking citizens' views on board before laws are made or applications are made. Finland, another one of, the examples I bring here, is actually an ecosystem of websites. I won't pronounce them, my Finnish is non-existent. Apologies to those Finnish colleagues here. But anyhow, it's also one of the finalists of the Open Government Awards from 2014. And it's 5 main websites which collectively basically enable citizens to share their views about legislation, about public policy in Finland. And it's interesting because in the Finnish constitution, this is actually a constitutional right. Finnish people have the constitutional right to be asked and contribute their opinions about laws affecting their lives. simple maybe, but I think it's a groundbreaking thing to put that in the Constitution. And these are a set of websites that allow for e-petitions to be made, for ideas to be gathered, for civil servants to talk directly with citizens, to collect signatures on these e-petitions, both at the national and the municipal level. Again, something that is worth looking at, a very good practice. Another very brief example I brought from Finland is a lake wiki, or the Järvi wiki, which, as you know, Finland being the land of lakes, they are very proud of their nature, obviously, for right reasons. This is actually a crowdsourced wiki page about the condition of lakes and waters in the Baltic Sea region. Well, Finland first, and then the wider Baltic Sea region. So again, citizens can contribute with data, observations, photos, etc., about water quality, water temperature, ice conditions, etc. And this is actually, this website is accessed by more than 300,000 people a month. So again, it does a very good service, crowdsourcing, and bringing benefit to the citizens. Number 3, I think we are on, Sweden. And I think it's an example that will be talked about later in the day, so I won't say too much, but it's one of the sort of better known offline consultation examples, Almedal's Week, which was, I think, founded in the early 80s by the late Prime Minister Olof Palme, before he was Prime Minister. But it's basically one of the largest sort of collective gatherings of people to discuss politics, social issues, public policy, debates, for a week, and it has now at this point 35,000 participants. So it's a fairly large event in which citizens are engaged, and it has actually inspired many similar initiatives, both in and beyond the region. So Estonia, obviously, has a similar thing. Norway, I think Denmark has one as well. Coming closer to home, Latvia has a very interesting initiative, which again was shortlisted for the 2015 Open Government Awards, which is a mobile application and a website, basically, called Let's Share the Burden. And it's a first of its kind in the European Union. Basically, the State Chancellery initiated this to collect citizens' feedback about, again, public services, both on a mobile app and on the website, to submit ideas on how to improve bureaucracy, cut out, the tedious parts, improve efficiency of tax filing, of registering a business, of notary services, etc. So again, things that might be a bit boring, but obviously affect all of our lives. Estonia, sort of a twin example, if you will, so 2 related examples. One very famous one, oftentimes cited, which is the People's Assembly, which took place in 2013, a nationwide sort of effort engaging, a big chunk of the population of Estonians to reform party finance, the political kind of structure of the country, the functions and the financing of political parties, the electoral law, etc. Hugely important. And it was several months over which, some estimates say 1/3 of the population participated in one way or another to submit ideas on how to improve, how to reform the systems, which were then actually vetted by experts, impact assessments were provided, long analyses were made on what, whether they would work as laws, and then eventually quite a few of them were actually voted into law by the Estonian parliament. And the twin side of this, which is rahvalgatus.ee, which is actually came out of one of the decisions of the earlier One People's Assembly that passed that if 1,000 digital signatures are collected in Estonia on a citizen initiative, it has to be discussed by the parliament, which I think is great. So this is actually a site that can, where citizens can submit these ideas, and then people can vote on it. And if it reaches 1,000 digital signatures, again, the parliament is obliged to take it on its agenda. This is actually a commitment in OGP as well for Estonia, and it's one of our sort of star commitments. Lithuania, and we have somebody in the room sitting who can explain even better than I do. I wanted to bring an example that TI Lithuania, partly did. I think led on with some partners. Jonva, I can't pronounce it, jonvabalajai.lt, sorry for mangling that. It basically means the firefly. And it's, again, a first of its kind initiative in the EU, and it got, a Regio Star EU award last year for basically bringing the information about EU projects online and allowing citizens to basically look at whether these projects have been transparent and they are working the way they were promised. Two more examples, and then we'll have some time for questions as well. Poland, again, not a member of OGP, so this is not an example that we can sort of claim to have brought under the umbrella of open government partnership, but nevertheless, a good example, an old example made actually pretty well in Poland, which is participatory budgeting. Like this is one of the oldest ideas of basically modern citizen engagement coming out of Porto Alegre in 1989. And then it first adopted in Poland in 2011 on the Baltic Sea resort of Sopot. And now actually spreading to all the largest cities. Warsaw is just having one actually as we speak. Krakow, Wrocław, they all have this. And it has actually a pretty good uptake. As you can see, the zloty figure, it's a 70 million euro worth of money was basically decided by citizens on how to spend in their municipalities. And again, an impressive figure is that in terms of participation, somewhere between 35% to 15% of the population actually votes. So in Warsaw, the figure is 15. In Wrocław, which is their third largest city, it was 35%. Hundreds of thousands of people actually giving their say how to spend up to 1 or 2% of the city budget. And last but not least, the country where I actually currently call my home, Germany, one of the latest and newest entrants into open government partnership. The fragdenstaat.de website, which is, there's a lot of these websites now around the world. It basically enables citizens to lodge requests, information requests to public institutions. Why this is quite unique is because it's so wide-ranging that it covers all the levels of the German state. It has 15,000 institutions you can launch questions to, more than 1,000 municipalities, etc. And again, you can track the responses of public servants and institutions. All right, so closing up here and coming maybe a full circle. So what is the end result of all this citizen engagement? And this is how we began, the introduction to the day today is basically the trust in the political system. One might say this is a chicken and egg, right? First you have trust and therefore citizens participate. I like to think of it as a virtuous cycle. Of course, citizens participate, government is open, so more trust in the system. And that, of course, also helps citizens to turn around and then engage again, right? Because they know that if they do, they are listened to. So how does trust in political system look in this region? Again, maybe some good news. So I put the OECD /EU, so the overlap of the OECD and the EU, that's 24 countries currently, average in the ranks, so it's 3.6. All the Nordic countries, Germany and Estonia, are above it. Latvia at that time wasn't a member yet when this data was gathered, apologies, and Lithuania is not yet a member, so we don't have the figures for them. The only country that actually comes below the EU average is Poland. So I think still, relatively speaking, I think the region is doing okay. As you can see, the top score is 10, and even the best scoring, Finland, and Denmark closely there, is only reaching a little bit above half of that score. So of course, there's always room for improvement, as I said. And earlier on, you remember that our voter turnout, half of the countries below the average, half of them above. So we might be wondering, how did we get from sort of the Baltic way, to sliding down in, the closer Baltic region to very low public participation? And of course it happens, and we see this happening, that many times once democracies are established, sort of participating in public life stops being sexy and interesting. People turn to their own, mind their own business, whereas politics sort of becomes professionalized for party bureaucrats, lobbyists, and media hacks. And then, people one day might wake up to see that, power by many, which is enshrined in our constitutions, has become, a privilege of the few. Of course, it's a rude awakening, which we see across, the globe, in many corners of the world. populists are, springing up and dismantling or trying to dismantle our checks and balances, right? I mean, even sometimes undermine global order. Just some, maybe stereotypical examples, of course, Brexit from last year, the Trump election from last year, and, his very recent undermining of the Paris climate accord. Of course, they're very worrying trends. And then everywhere in the world you see outsiders coming into politics, right? I mean, even Emmanuel Macron, who is by no means a populist, but he still could be said to be a relatively outsider figure in politics. So there is this tension between, those who want to fix the system from within, using the institutions, our values, checks and balances, and those who kind of think that the system is outdated, we need outside solutions, and they peddle these sort of better solutions. But I do agree, and let me close here by saying that there are, I think we are the ones who represent these, the better solutions. Ultimately, citizen trust can be only regained if we talk to each other, if government listens to people, validates our concerns, because people are on the streets and people are actually voting for the outsiders because they feel they are not listened to. So citizen engagement is the ultimate fundamental key in gaining this trust of ourselves and of each other. So let me bring up with a few takeaways. Trust leads to prosperity, happiness, and stability. And this might be a sweeping statement, but I don't think in those of you who have had some economic background, you don't even need this to have it. But you know that trust is fundamental in economic prosperity. But very interestingly, a study that just came out again this year, which measures happiness, backed by the UN, is the World Happiness Report. And I quote here, they say that high trust communities and societies are happier places to live, even after allowing for the effects of higher incomes and better health. So of course, trust leads to better health because mentally you feel you are safe in this community. It leads to better economic performance. But even if you control for these figures, trust in and of itself has an intrinsic value and makes countries happier. And here's a warning for governments around the world, and I won't touch Latvian politics, but actually across time, if you look at the figures, the best predictor of re-election of any government is life satisfaction. It's not low unemployment, it's not GDP growth, it's this nebulous concept of life satisfaction. And it's intrinsically linked to two things. Number one, democratic institutions in a country. If people feel they can do whatever they want and they have the free choice. And then number two, the quality of public services. And again, for both, if you think about it, you need citizen engagement. You need to hear what people need in terms of public services, and you need to involve them in the very fabric of democratic society. So that will lead to life satisfaction, which again will lead hopefully to re-election of governments if that's what they want to do. Another one, as I said at the beginning, just to repeat, there are no overachievers, only good practices. We've seen a few. Hopefully we'll see some more later today. Maybe a slight warning, especially for those better performing Nordic countries, is that complacency can obviously undermine trust. One of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein says that I'm not that smart, I'm just sticking to the challenge more than others, which talks about the value of persistence. And I think citizen engagement also embodies this. It's not a one-off game. You can't have these websites once and then leave it to be. It's a constant effort, as we all know it. So we need to stick to the guns, and we need to engage the public again and again and again, because maybe the normal tendency nowadays is to withdraw from public life, and we need to counter that. This is one of the mantras OGP has. Good ideas come from anywhere. It's true within a society, and it's true across the globe. They don't just come from developed nations. They come from the rural parts of less developed nations. And again, even within a society, it can come from any citizen. No public servant has the philosopher's stone, of course. Again, one of the reasons why we need to listen and talk to each other. And as I said, I think let this be my last kind of comment. The cornerstone of this, the fundamental ingredient of this, is citizen engagement. It's the key to both trust and veracity or truth. I don't like to use the word truth, although obviously we can agree there are certain facts which are undermined. We live in an era when trust almost has become more important than truth, right? What matters is not what is being said, but who is saying it, which I think puts an awesome responsibility on politicians, as well as civil society, as well as the elite, I guess I could call us that in this room as well, who speak on behalf of citizens. It's an awesome responsibility, even more so if you consider the flip side of the coin, which is that basically if you're not trusted as a politician or a citizen or a civil servant or a civil society activist, even if you speak the truth, you won't be listened to, right? So I want to close with that. I wanted to say and remind us all that there is a Baltic way, maybe symbolically or otherwise, and let that spirit of the Baltic way guide us in our day-to-day and beyond in our work day-to-day. So thank you again. The floor, I guess, is open for a few questions.
Thanks so much, Peter, for your illuminating, inspiring, and I would even say wise keynote speech. I've never seen our region put into such context, and I think both the indicators that you found and also the examples that you showcased, and about some of which we will talk more in depth a bit later, and we will mention others, they were fantastic. So thanks, thanks so much. We have now some 10 minutes for questions and answers. So raise your hand. Okay, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Irina. No? Okay. Zinta Miesainen.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Zinta Miesainen, and I'm somehow related to the OGP process. So I am independent reporting mechanism researcher. And right now, report on Latvia is open for public comments on OGP website. So welcome to see how Latvia is doing.
Okay, it was more a remark rather than a question. Yeah? Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Just a short question. There was a slide showing the world map. When it's closed or open government, I was really surprised that our region, and also Latvia, surpassed even Canada and UK. How come? Because Latvia is more open than UK and Canada. I'm surprised.
Shall we collect some? And,
okay.
Or I'm happy to. Yeah,
okay, then I'm going to Zaig and then to Valdis.
Yes, my name is Zaga Poza. One question is that Irina asked already. I just wanted to ask about methodology, how it's, I don't know, what are the points why we are more open than UK and all the other countries, Irina told. And the other question I wanted to ask is about, you showed, I mean, in second slide, it was Sweden and Denmark, the big engagement in elections. I wanted to ask why do you think it is so, that it's so high? One of the things I have heard, but it's like a rumor heard, that they have a punishment if people don't go to vote. So I would like to hear your version.
Okay, Zaga.
Sure.
Peter, I have two questions. One is, have there been any studies made on the key factors that influence civic engagement? And the other one is a bit of a devil's advocate thing. The more open the society, the lower the trust for politicians. Could you comment on that?
Okay, I think we have drowned you in questions.
Sure.
Some of those have to do with open society partnership, and are you sometimes surprised with the level of commitment that different countries have, and the rest. So address whatever you feel you have some response to. Thanks.
Sure. So there were actually two questions that touched upon, this how is openness measured and how come, some, I guess, traditionally viewed sort of overachievers, I use that word, apologies, so good performers are judged better than, say, Latvia, etc. I can't speak on behalf of Civic because I do know a little bit about the methodology. They don't just look at some of the indices that exist for trust, etc. They are one of the largest network of international civil society organizations, and they work on, on-the-ground input from activists, citizens, etc. So to do like sort of interviews, qualitative assessments, as well as quantitative assessments. It's also actually a little bit more timely than most other indices, because if somebody calls up and says that just yesterday a journalist was arrested, etc., that their tracker is real live tracker and it takes care of this. Now, why some of the countries like the US, Canada are less open than these Nordic regions? I think one of the reasons, the main reason probably for this is the work on anti-terrorism. In many of these societies, there have been somewhat restrictive laws now put in place that restrict the freedom of assembly, freedom of association. And actually, Lithuania is the one country from this region which is also a bit less open, again, thanks to some of these laws that are put in place, and also restrict sometimes minority, in this case, Russian. Some called propaganda, some called free speech. Again, I don't want to go necessarily into that debate, but the ability of people necessarily to express themselves. So on the face of it, this might lower the score in some more developed countries. Voter turnout in Sweden and Denmark. Why is it so high? I'm not aware of any punishments in these countries. It's sort of an outlier, because I know I said that once democracies are established, the business becomes a bit less sexy. And of course, in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, democracies have been established for a long time. I think they are outliers precisely because of the trust issue. And that's something that, social scientists are tackling with. There's a whole library of, how to get to Denmark. How do you get to that, very high social trust society? I think it obviously takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. But I think why they still go consistently at such high numbers is because of this high social trust. Again, they know that if they vote for politicians, that politician will actually speak on behalf, will actually carry out what they promise, will actually resign, as they do if corruption, comes to the light. And again, I always used to say, and I still do not so much because I'm no longer with TI, but it's not that there's no corruption in Nordic societies. There's corruption everywhere. The difference is that when it comes to the light, how do you deal with it? And Nordic countries deal with it in a healthier way that engenders trust, and then again, that obviously is linked to higher voter turnout. Are there studies on key factors that influence civic engagement? I think, again, all these soft elements we talked about influence civic engagement. And I know, how do you measure trust? Of course, you ask people, and it's all about perceptions, and the same with corruption. But really, ultimately, what makes you as a citizen want to contribute is when you know that you are listened to, that it's taken on board, that you get feedback. Even if your idea is not liked by the majority, that you are listened to. In Holland, there's a lovely initiative, also part of OGP, in which basically civic servants took to calling up people who complain. Instead of sending these official, hard-to-understand bureaucratic letters, they have a chat. And it's such a simple way of, we call you on your first name, we validate your concern, and we tell you, what the issue is. And ultimately, both sides kind of hang up more empowered, happier, more kind of satisfied with the arrangement. So I think these soft elements are what really can lead to higher civic engagement. Of course, you can mention education, awareness raising about democratic principles, etc., which a lot of countries do, but in and of themselves, they may not be enough. We need to obviously walk the talk as well. And the more open societies have lower trust in politicians, in some cases. Sorry, yeah.
Does open civic engagement, open government lead to, or can it lead to a less trust in politicians?
Right. I would say yes and no. So in the short run, it might be perceived that yes, if you know of more corruption cases, if you are open, obviously there's transparency in the system that brings to the fore some of the dirt that, is there anyhow, which can be perceived that it lowers the trust because people see everybody is corrupt, right? But in the long run, this is necessary. It's sort of an interim step, so to speak. It's necessary to clean the system. And again, when you see, and this is what people need to understand, that there is corruption and dirt in every society, it's how we deal with it. So bringing it to the fore, acknowledging that there's a problem is the first step. I know this is, also therapeutic in many circles. So in the short run, I think you might say, wait a minute, we see that, there's more corruption. That means that, there actually is more corruption. No, we're just better at detecting it. And then the next step comes, and if we get to that point and we don't give up halfway, is when we clean it up, when people realize that they cannot get away with it, when they start behaving properly, better, etc. So in the long run, more openness certainly does lead to more trust and citizen engagement. In the short run, yes, you're right. It might actually make people think that, wait a minute, something changed for the worse. But again, in the long run, I think it's changing for the better.
Okay.
Right, sure. No, I know. You said you are the devil's advocate. I know. Don't worry about this. Thank you.
Okay, maybe the last question, because we're really running a bit already over time, so short one.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for your presentation. I have a question a bit about civic engagement and how to enhance it. You yourself mentioned that, you know, it's important to not only focus on online activities, but actually to also take into consideration some offline activities. However, more than half of the great examples you showed involved online projects. And when we speak about offline, mostly they're like, you know, discussion festivals, which are great, but mostly attended by kind of the same people, you know, same pool of people. So my question would be, what's your advice for kind of reaching out towards a more diverse and different audience? How to get them to these kind of events, so to say?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. How do you counter this apathy? I mean, ultimately, again, it's my answer might sound simplistic, but like you need to do and ask the questions that interest people. A lot of the stuff that, you know, government has to deal with is just simple, boring, and people don't necessarily realize that it affects their lives until they might run into a problem. So I think the Latvian example is, for example, a good one, you know, to package it in a way. I know it's an online one, but you can do this offline as well. You can do road trips, you can go and ask people on the street. I know it's more resource intensive, but this requires resources. It's a hard slog. But anyhow, so basically coming to them with questions, ideas that interest them, that affect them day to day, speaking to them in a simple language, not bureaucratese, which, you know, many civil servants do. Sometimes even the Estonian example is an interesting one for the People's Assembly. They actually, for the final decisions on those ideas they collected, they randomly, statistically, you know, a representative sample, but randomly invited Estonians to come to this People's Assembly, and 70% of them accepted once they were picked. So you can use even, you know, this type of random sampling and then get them invited. A lot of times it's just they don't know about it or they're not interested. So I think those are some easy fixes.
We will continue this conversation. An Estonian example was Katja's presentation during the next phase of this event, and we will also try to brainstorm during our workshops sessions the answer to your question: what do we do in order to reach more people, and not just this common pool that usually attends democracy festivals. So it will all come in some hours. But right now we will have a 10-minute break before the next part starts. And I would like to thank you once again, Peter, for your wonderful keynote speech and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, a break.